Welcome back. Diving deeper now into the most important issue facing the country, according to voters in our latest NBC News poll. Threats to democracy. The issue surpasses the cost of living, the economy, and immigration. But where voters stand on what those threats are depends on which side of the aisle they sit. When Democrats, who said it was the most important issue, were asked what threats to democracy means, they gave a variety of responses, including voter suppression, election fraud, and Trumpism. When Republicans were asked the same question, their answers included government control, censorship, and political corruption. I am joined now by Basil Smikle, Democratic strategist and former executive director of the New York State Democratic Party, and Noah Rothman, associate editor of Commentary Magazine. Thanks so much to both of you. Let me just have you react to that poll, if you would. Basil, first to you. What do you make of the fact that voters are saying threats to democracy is the #1 issue, but they can't agree on a definition of what it means?
Part of what it says is that Democrats actually did their job. That between the 2 impeachment hearings, which are sort of well in our rearview mirror at this point, but certainly those January 6th hearings brought up a lot of issues and concerns around people in the Trump orbit that should give people some concern about the threats to democracy. When you add that to Trump's own language throughout, when he talks about, even he uses words like menacing and sinister to describe Democrats, this has to be concerning for a lot of voters. In addition to that, independent voters are now saying that they have concerns about what was found at Mar-a-Lago. They have concerns about whether Trump should run for president again. They don't think he should. All of those things together suggest that Democrats did their job.
Noah, what about that?
I think voters got a very concrete answer as to what a threat to democracy looks like on January 6th. If voters were responding January 6th in that word cloud, I think we would have a very concrete nature of the threat and how to address that threat legislatively. What we're seeing are partisan responses, voter suppression, which is a nebulous concept.
Isn't that the challenge, though, of addressing this core issue if you can't agree on the very definition?
I think this poll question registers how many voters are engaged partisans on the issue of democratic threats. To Republicans, it's voter fraud, which is equally nebulous, impossible to prove, very rare when it is proven. Voter suppression, another thing that is subject to interpretation. This is a response that partisans, it triggers partisan responses, partisans engage. I don't think it's a measure of where the electorate is.
Let me play you a little bit of what Vice Chair of the January 6th Committee, Liz Cheney, had to say in a speech, and then get both of your reactions on the other side.
I want to make absolutely clear at the outset that, what we saw happen in 2020 with Donald Trump and Mike Pence, what Donald Trump tried to convince the vice president to do was illegal under existing law, and we begin by affirming that. But we need to then take steps to make sure that another January 6th is, something that never happens again.
Noah, your reaction. She's spending her final days in office really focused on this. She didn't win her bid for re-election, but she's making it clear her political career is not ending. This is just a new chapter.
Yeah, God bless her. As far as what I knew Liz Cheney for legislatively prior to January 6th, was foreign policy, was a hawkish representative of an advocate for the expansion of American power, expression of American power abroad. This is no longer her brand. Her brand is very dedicated to domestic election integrity and preserving the mechanisms of self-government and the Constitution. And that is a rebranding effort that is, I don't know if it's going to take her very far because it is such a change from what we understand her to be. But she does seem to be gearing up to be, this is her mission.
Basil, what's your take, and how much crossover appeal is there? Because you do have Democrats, some Democrats, who are cheering her on. Doesn't mean they would vote for her, though, if she were to run for higher office.
Well, let's be clear. While I appreciate the role that she's taking right now, as a black voter, she wasn't there for me fighting for voting rights.
And so what she's doing now is not enough.
And so what she's doing now will resonate with some. If she does it in a very limited role, go to the suburbs, engage white women, for example, to try to get them out to vote for Democrats. That it could be very singularly her role. Anything broader than that, she's going to have a credibility problem, not just among Democrats, but among Republicans also.
Well, one of the bills that she backs, the Electoral Count Act, is going to be voted on the House floor tomorrow. It's expected to pass the House, but it's really uphill when it gets to the Senate. Is there any expectation that this might pass before the midterms or soon thereafter? given really the urgency, I think, that both parties feel to do something on this issue.
Do they really feel a lot of urgency on this issue?
Well, I do think there's been a lot of discussion about it, and particularly given what happened on January 6th, I think there is broad recognition that there at least needs to be clarity as it relates to the Electoral Count Act.
By her advocacy alone, it will be seen as a shot over Donald Trump's bow, which makes it harder for Republicans to vote for it. After the midterms, much like the same-sex marriage bill, postpone it after the midterms, you probably get a lot more Republicans that feel less pressure to avoid supporting it.
Let's talk about immigration. Let's talk about the fact that some Republican governors are sending busloads full of migrants to so-called sanctuary cities. Basil, there's been a backlash to this, and yet you see Republican governors defiant. Ron DeSantis leading the charge in some ways, saying we're not backing down from this tactic. What do you make of it? And is it politically difficult for Democrats, or do you think they're winning on the issue?
Well, even Mitch McConnell said, hey, that's a good idea, and which is stunning because there is no one standing up outside of Democrats for these individuals. This is inhumane. It is despicable. It has a long history of black and brown people being treated in this way during the civil rights era. There were reverse freedom rides where blacks were sent north, also to the Martha's Vineyard area without jobs, without opportunities. So this has happened before. The fact that it's still happening is unconscionable. And I do think it helps Democrats because it shows our compassion.
I must pick a fight with you, Basil, as much as we're friends
That's
here.
That's what we're here for.
I can't imagine there are Americans out there who find it terribly offensive that we are comparing African-American citizens, the relocation of citizens in a racist campaign, with the transference of custody of non-citizens in custody. Who are the African-Americans in this analogy? Are non-citizens? What do Hispanic Americans think of this?
I've heard that critique. The reality is that black and brown people get treated similarly, not the same, similarly in this country and have for generations. And my feeling is that whether they are African Americans whose ancestors are slaves, or whether they are recent immigrants, this country has a habit of wanting it to look a certain way, wanting the narrative to be a certain narrative, and that is clear in how these individuals are being treated by being bussed away as though they were nothing.
No, could that perception backlash for these Republican governors?
It could. I don't think it will. In part because every ounce of energy that is spent on this is an ounce of energy that was not spent on the family that has spent 3 nights sleeping on the streets of El Paso and is grateful and is talking to the Vineyard Gazette about how grateful they are to not be in that circumstance anymore, and grateful to the Republicans who paid their freight.
All right. Well, this conversation will continue. Thank you.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.